She had never held a gun in her life. Her hands were shaking so hard she could barely keep the barrel up. But she pointed that shotgun at the man who had come to destroy everything she loved, and she said, "Get off our land." 6 months earlier, she was a virgin bride running away from a wedding she did not choose. This is how she ended up on a mountain in Montana in love with two brothers with a gun in her hands and a storm closing in. She stood on the porch of a cabin that smelled like pine smoke and old leather, and the snow came down so thick it erased the world beyond the fence line. Blood ran in a slow, warm line from Colton's left forearm to his wrist, dripping off his knuckles onto the frozen wood beneath his boots. He did not look at the wound. He looked at the darkness where the tail lights of Nolan Pratt's truck had disappeared, swallowed by the storm, like they had never existed at all. Behind him through the door he had left open, because closing it felt like losing sight of the threat. Lily pressed a kitchen towel against Beckett's shoulder. Beckett sat at the table with his jaw locked and his teeth clenched so hard a muscle jumped in his cheek, but he did not make a sound. He had not made a sound since the first punch landed. "He will come back," Lily said. Her voice was steady in a way that surprised all three of them. "And next time he will not come alone." Colton did not turn around. His eyes stayed on the tree line, on the place where the headlights had vanished. Snow collected on his shoulders, on the barrel of the hunting rifle leaning against the railing beside him. "I know," he said. Beckett shifted in his chair, wincing as Lily applied pressure. "Then let him come. This time we will be ready." The wind howled across the valley, driving snow sideways through the porch light. Somewhere below the ridge, a coyote called out and received no answer. This is how it all began. Not with a gunshot or a blizzard or a fist thrown in anger. It began with a broken-down car on a dirt road in autumn and a woman who had spent her entire life running from other people's plans for her future. It began with two brothers on a mountain who did not know that everything they had built, everything they had promised to protect, was about to be tested by the one thing neither of them had planned for. 6 months earlier. Before we continue, tell me where you are watching from and hit subscribe for more stories like this. The car died at mile marker 47 on County Road 12, halfway between the last gas station and the first buildings of Elk Ridge, Montana. It did not die dramatically. There was no explosion, no smoke pouring from beneath the hood, no screech of failing brakes. The engine simply coughed twice, shuddered like a sick animal, and went silent. The dashboard lights flickered once, and then they went dark too, as if the car had decided with quiet finality that it was done. Lillian Mercer sat behind the wheel for a full 30 seconds before she accepted that this was actually happening. She turned the key. Nothing. Turned it again. The starter clicked once, a dry and mechanical sound that held no promise whatsoever. She leaned back in her seat and stared through the windshield at the dirt road stretching ahead of her, flanked on both sides by lodgepole pines, so tall they turned the late afternoon light green and gold. No cell signal. She had checked 3 times in the last 20 minutes, watching the bars disappear one by one as the road climbed higher into the foothills. Her phone was now an expensive paperweight, sitting in the cup holder displaying the time and nothing else. 4:17 in the afternoon. Early October. The sun would set in about 2 hours, and the temperature, which had been pleasant enough when she left the highway, was already dropping. She had 2 suitcases in the trunk, a box of books on the back seat, and a letter of employment from the Elk Ridge County Assessor's Office folded neatly in her purse. She had driven 8 hours from Denver that morning. She had not told her mother where she was going until she was already past Fort Collins, and even then the conversation had lasted less than 4 minutes before Vera Mercer's voice had climbed to the register. That meant tears were coming, and Lily had said, "I love you and I will call when I get there," and had ended the call with her hands shaking on the wheel. She was 24 years old. She had a degree in accounting from the University of Colorado. She had never been kissed. She had never had a boyfriend, a lover, a date that lasted past the appetizer course. Not because she was unattractive. She had dark auburn hair that caught the light in ways that made people look twice, green eyes she had inherited from a father she barely remembered, and a face that was more interesting than conventionally pretty, the kind of face that improved with attention. But Lily Mercer had spent her entire life inside a perimeter drawn by other people. Her mother's faith, her church's expectations. The quiet, suffocating assumption that a good girl did not seek, did not want, did not reach for anything that had not been pre-approved by committee. She was done with that. She was done with Vera's carefully selected candidates from the congregation, done with Wednesday prayer circles, where the women her mother's age looked at her with a pity that tasted like poison, done with the apartment in Aurora, where every surface held a framed Bible verse, and every Sunday ended with the question, "So have you met anyone yet?" She had met someone, actually. Vera had arranged it. David Calloway, son of Deacon Calloway, 28 years old, steady job at an insurance company, hair parted on the left side every single day of his life. He was nice. He was so relentlessly, determinedly nice that spending an hour with him felt like being slowly buried alive in beige carpet. And Vera had started talking about the wedding before Lily had even agreed to a second lunch. That was when she saw the job posting. County Assessor's Office, Elk Ridge, Montana. Population approximately 2,000. 8 hours from Denver. 8 hours from her mother. 8 hours from David Calloway and his insurance job, and his side-parted hair, and the life that Lily could see stretching ahead of her like a highway through flat country, straight and predictable, and leading absolutely nowhere. She applied on a Tuesday, got the call on a Thursday, packed her car on a Saturday. And now here she was, mile marker 47. Engine dead, daylight fading in the middle of absolutely nowhere, wondering if the universe was trying to tell her something about the wisdom of running away from the only life she had ever known. The sound of an engine reached her before she saw the truck. Low and rumbling, the kind of diesel growl that belonged to something old and well-maintained and built for work rather than appearances. It came around the bend behind her and slowed the driver, clearly seeing her car pulled to the shoulder with its hood still closed and its hazard lights not flashing because nothing electrical was functioning anymore. The truck stopped about 20 feet back. Two doors opened simultaneously. Two men stepped out, and for a disorienting moment, Lily thought she was seeing double. They were identical. Both stood well over 6 feet broad through the shoulders and narrow at the hips built, the way men get built when their muscles come from labor rather than a gym. Dark hair cut short, but not military short, just messy enough to suggest they did not spend time thinking about it. Jaws that looked like they had been designed by someone who believed strongly in right angles. Eyes the color of amber held up to firelight, deep set beneath brows that gave their faces a permanent expression of quiet intensity. They wore similar clothes. Broken-in jeans, work boots caked with dried mud, flannel shirts with the sleeves rolled to the forearm, revealing corded muscle and tanned skin, and hands that were large and scarred in the way that hands get scarred from years of fence wire and engine repair and splitting wood in winter. The only visible difference was a scar. The man who came around the driver's side had a small pale line cutting through his left eyebrow, disrupting its arc like a word with a letter missing. The other man, the one from the passenger side, did not. The one with the scar reached her window first. He did not smile. He did not introduce himself. He looked at the car, then at her, then at the car, again the way a doctor looks at an X-ray when the diagnosis is obvious, but he is too polite to say it immediately. The other one, the one without the scar, got there half a second later and grinned in a way that transformed his face from intimidating to something approaching warmth. "Well," he said, leaning down to look at the engine through the windshield as if he could diagnose it through glass, "this car does not need a mechanic. It needs a miracle." The first one was already moving to the front. He glanced at Lily through the windshield, gave her a short nod that seemed to mean stay there, and lifted the hood. His hands were big and sure, moving across the engine components, with the confidence of someone who had fixed 1,000 things and expected to fix 1,000 more. Lily watched him work and noticed something. His hands trembled. Very slightly, a barely perceptible vibration in his fingers that had nothing to do with the cooling temperature. She had seen that kind of tremor before. In the veterans who attended her mother's church back in Denver, the ones who sat in the back pews and left before the coffee hour, the ones whose eyes went somewhere else when the congregation sang too loudly. He knew what was wrong within 2 minutes. He straightened up, wiped his hands on his jeans, and spoke for the first time. "Alternator is dead, possibly the voltage regulator too." His voice was low, unhurried, with the kind of natural authority that did not need volume to command attention. "Cannot fix it here. Need parts from Bozeman. 3 or 4 days at least." "3 or 4 days," Lily repeated. "We can tow it back to our place," the second one said. He was still smiling, but his eyes were doing something more serious, scanning her face with a kind of open curiosity that was not rude but was definitely thorough. Got a garage, tools, and I am guessing you do not have a backup plan for tonight. She did not. She had planned to drive straight to Elk Ridge, check into the boarding house. June Harper ran above her coffee shop and start her new job on Monday morning. She had not planned for her car to die on a road with no cell service, no traffic, and approximately 2 hours of remaining daylight. She looked at the two men standing in front of her car. Two strangers, clearly brothers, probably twins, built like they could each lift the vehicle she was sitting in. She was alone on a deserted mountain road. Every safety lecture her mother had ever given her was screaming in the back of her mind. But something made her pause. The first man, the quiet one with the scar, had walked away from her car and was pulling a wool blanket from behind the truck's bench seat. He did not hand it to her. He placed it on the passenger seat of the truck, folded neatly, and then stepped back, creating space, giving her the choice without pressure. It was such a small gesture, but it told her something that his brother's easy charm could not. This man understood boundaries. He understood what it meant to be a woman alone in an unfamiliar place with strangers who were bigger and stronger than her. And he was adjusting himself accordingly, not because someone told him to, but because that was who he was. Okay, she said. Thank you. They hooked her car to the truck with a tow chain that looked like it had seen decades of use. The drive to the ranch took 20 minutes, during which the talkative brother who introduced himself as Beckett Briggs managed to ask her where she was from, what brought her to Elk Ridge, whether she had ever been to Montana before, and whether she preferred dogs or cats, all without seeming intrusive. His conversation had a warmth to it, a genuine interest that made her feel less like a stranger being questioned and more like a neighbor being welcomed. The quiet brother drove. Colton Briggs. He offered his name and nothing else, keeping his eyes on the road and his hands steady on the wheel. Lily sat between them on the bench seat, the blanket across her lap, acutely aware of the size of both men on either side of her and the way the cab of the truck felt simultaneously too small and strangely safe. She noticed the photograph first. Tucked into the sun visor above Colton's head, a faded snapshot of a woman standing on a mountain ridge. The woman was beautiful in a natural, unposed way, her dark hair blowing sideways in the wind, her smile wide and unguarded. Behind her, the landscape fell away into a valley so vast it looked like the edge of the world. Lily did not ask about the photograph, but she filed it away the way she filed away numbers and patterns and things that did not quite add up yet. Briggs Ranch appeared as the road crested a final hill, and even in the fading golden light of late afternoon, it was enough to make Lily forget just for a moment everything that had gone wrong that day. The main house was a two-story log structure that looked like it had grown out of the mountainside rather than been built on it. A wide porch wrapped around three sides, furnished with rocking chairs that had been worn smooth by decades of use. Beyond the house, a barn and stable complex stretched along a ridge, and beyond that, pasture land rolled toward the mountains in shades of amber and rust, dotted with cattle that moved slowly against the darkening sky. The peaks of the Rockies rose behind everything, snow-capped even in October, catching the last of the sunset in shades of rose and copper. Home, Beckett said, and there was something in the way he said it, pride and grief and stubbornness, all woven together, that made the word sound like a declaration of war against anything that might try to take it from him. They insisted she stay for dinner. She intended to decline. Her stomach, however, betrayed her with a growl so loud that Beckett laughed outright, and even Colton for the first time allowed the corner of his mouth to lift in something that was almost not quite but almost a smile. The kitchen was large and warm, heated by a wood-burning stove that made the whole room smell like cedar. Beckett cooked with enthusiasm and questionable skill, narrating his process like a television chef while simultaneously burning the garlic and oversalting the pasta. Colton moved around his brother with practiced ease, setting the table, slicing bread, quietly fixing the things Beckett was destroying without drawing attention to the corrections. Lily watched them. She could not help it. There was something hypnotic about the way they occupied the same space, never colliding, never getting in each other's way, communicating in glances and half gestures that carried the weight of entire conversations. They moved like two musicians who had been playing the same song for so long they no longer needed sheet music. Over dinner, she learned their father, Walt Briggs, had died 3 years ago. Heart attack sudden in the barn on a Tuesday morning. He was 61. They found him beside the tractor he had been repairing, his tools still laid out in the meticulous order. He insisted on his coffee, still warm in the cup on the workbench. Their mother, Margaret, who everyone called Maggie, had died when they were 18. Cancer. Slow and brutal and merciless in the way it hollowed her out from the inside while the boys watched helpless, learning for the first time that there were things in this world that could not be fixed with strong hands and hard work. Colton had enlisted after Maggie's death, 2 tours in Afghanistan. He came back with the scar on his eyebrow from a piece of shrapnel that missed his eye by a 1/4 inch, and with other wounds that did not show on the surface but announced themselves in the tremor of his hands and the way he sometimes stared at nothing for too long. Beckett had stayed. Kept the ranch runnings alone for those years, learning to train horses because it was the one skill that could generate income while Colton was overseas. He was good at it, more than good. He had a gift for reading animals, for sensing what they needed before they knew it themselves, a kind of intuitive empathy that extended to people. Too, though, he would never have used that word. They shared everything. Always had. Bedroom as children, responsibilities as teenagers, grief as young men. The ranch was theirs equally, every decision made together, every burden carried in tandem. Mom made us promise, Beckett said, pushing pasta around his plate in a way that suggested the memory still sat heavy. Before she died, she said we were always stronger together, said never let anyone or anything split you apart. Colton had stopped eating. He was looking at his plate, but his eyes were somewhere far away, somewhere with sand and heat and sounds that no kitchen in Montana could drown out. She was right, he said quietly, and that was all he said about it. Lily asked about the photograph in the truck. The woman on the mountain. Beckett's fork paused midway to his mouth. He set it down. That is our mother, her favorite place in the world. Ridge about 4 miles up from here. She used to ride up there every Sunday morning instead of going to church. Silence. The wood stove crackled. She used to say, Colton spoke without looking up, his voice lower than before, that it was the closest place to God that did not need a church. The words settled into the room like snow settling onto a field. Quiet, complete. Lily felt something shift inside her chest. Not attraction, not yet though. The seeds of that were already planted in soil she did not know existed. What she felt was recognition. These men had lost everything that mattered and rebuilt their lives around a promise to a dead woman. And they had done it without self-pity, without asking anyone's permission, without waiting for the world to tell them it was okay. She understood that kind of building. She was trying to do the same thing herself. After dinner, they set her up in the living room. Best room in the house, Beckett said, though Lily suspected it was actually their room, and they had relocated to give her space. The couch was deep and soft, covered in quilts that smelled like lavender and wood smoke, and through the window she could see the mountains silvered by moonlight. She could not sleep. Too many new inputs, too much adrenaline from the day, too much awareness that she was lying in a strange house surrounded by mountains 8 hours from everything she knew, and that tomorrow she would have to start figuring out how to make this new life work. At 2 in the morning, she got up for water. The kitchen was dark, but through the window she could see the porch lit by a single bulb above the door. Colton stood there, alone, his back against the railing, his face tilted up toward the stars. He was not smoking, not drinking, not doing anything except standing in the cold and breathing. But his breathing was wrong, too fast, too shallow. The kind of breathing that belongs to someone fighting something invisible, something that lives in the body's memory in ambushes without warning. His hands hanging at his sides were shaking. Not the subtle tremor she had noticed earlier. This was worse. This was a man at war with his own nervous system forcing himself to stand still when every nerve was screaming at him to run or fight or do something, anything to make the ghost stop. He did not know she was watching. She was sure of that, because the expression on his face visible in the porch light was one he would never have allowed anyone to see. It was not pain exactly. It was exhaustion. The deep bone-level tiredness of a man who has been fighting the same battle every night for years and knows he will have to fight it again tomorrow. Lily stepped back from the window. She did not go out to him. She understood instinctively that he needed this moment to be private, that witnessing it without invitation would be a violation of something he guarded fiercely. But she lay awake for a long time afterward, thinking about the distance between the competent, stoic man who had lifted her car's hood and diagnosed the problem in under 2 minutes, and the shaking figure on the porch who could not outrun what he had seen on the other side of the world. There were two Coltons, and both of them, she realized with a clarity that frightened her, had already begun to matter to her. The car parts would take 3 to 4 days. But Elk Ridge had a boarding house and a coffee shop and a job waiting for her, and by the next morning, Beckett had volunteered to drive her into town so she could start settling in. Colton had already begun working on her car, having somehow sourced a temporary alternator from a rancher 2 valleys over who owed him a favor. Elk Ridge was exactly what its population of 2,000 suggested. A main street with a general store, a feed shop, a post office, and June's Brew, the coffee shop and boarding house, run by a woman who opened the door before Lily had finished knocking and said with a grin that was half welcome and half challenge, "New accountant. The last one lasted 2 months before she bolted. I hope you are tougher than you look." June Harper was 25, blonde hair cut short in a way that said she did not have time for anything that required a hairdryer, and possessed of the kind of honesty that most people found either refreshing or terrifying, depending on how much truth they could handle before breakfast. Lily liked her immediately. More importantly, Lily trusted her immediately, and Lily did not trust easily. June gave her a room above the coffee shop, made her a latte that was genuinely excellent, and proceeded to deliver a comprehensive briefing on every person in Elk Ridge that mattered. Dolores Pruitt runs the general store and also runs every piece of gossip in a 30-mile radius. If you sneeze on Monday, she will be telling people you have pneumonia by Wednesday. Harmless mostly, but be careful what you say around her. Pastor Dale Whitfield, good man, old school, believes in hellfire but also brings soup when you are sick. Do not discuss politics. Sheriff Tom Hadley, fair, slow, will not do anything until he has thought about it from 9 different angles, which means if you need help fast, you are better off helping yourself. And then June paused, coffee cup halfway to her lips, and looked at Lily with an expression that was suddenly very focused. "And the Briggs brothers, Colton and Beckett. I am guessing you have already met them since you showed up in Beckett's truck wearing a blanket that I am fairly certain came from their cabin. My car broke down. They helped me. They would. They are the best men in this valley, and I am not being dramatic about that. But Lily," June set her cup down, "this is a small town. You are young, you are single, and you just arrived in a truck with 2 of the most eligible and most complicated men in Elk Ridge. People are already talking. They were talking before you finished your first cup of coffee." "One, what kind of complicated?" June considered her answer carefully, which was unusual for a woman who generally said exactly what she thought without filtering. "The kind where nobody can figure out why 2 good-looking, hard-working men in their 30s are still single. The kind where people whisper but never say anything to their faces, because Colton once stared down a drunk cowboy at the 4th of July barbecue without blinking for so long, the man apologized for something he had not even done yet. The kind of complicated that this town does not have a box for." That should have been a warning. Lily heard it as an invitation. Over the next 2 weeks, Lily settled into Elk Ridge. The job at the assessor's office was straightforward, steady work that suited her methodical mind. Numbers behaved, spreadsheets made sense, land parcels had boundaries that could be measured and recorded and filed in systems that operated on logic rather than emotion. She was good at this, and being good at something after months of feeling like she was good at nothing except disappointing. Her mother felt like oxygen after being held underwater. The cabin she rented sat at the edge of town, a small 1-bedroom structure that had last been updated sometime during the Reagan administration. It was cold in the mornings, the water pressure was unreliable, and the front door stuck unless you kicked it in exactly the right spot. She loved it. It was hers. No framed Bible verses, no Wednesday prayer circle schedule pinned to the refrigerator, no mother standing in the doorway asking if she had called David Calloway back yet. But the thing she could not stop thinking about, the thing that sat in the back of her mind during spreadsheets and coffee breaks and the long quiet evenings in her cabin, was the ranch and the 2 men who lived there. Colton delivered vegetables from the ranch garden to her cabin on a Wednesday evening. A wooden crate filled with tomatoes, squash, and herbs left on her porch with a piece of paper that said in handwriting, so precise it looked like an architect's blueprint, "Grew too much. Would go to waste." Beckett started appearing at June's Brew at exactly the time Lily usually stopped in after work. Coincidence, he claimed with a grin that made the words sound like a joke they were both in on. She thought about them. She thought about Colton's quiet, steady presence, the way he occupied space without demanding attention, the way his silences felt like shelter rather than absence. She thought about Beckett's warmth, the way he could make her laugh with a single raised eyebrow, the way he looked at her when she talked, really looked with an attention so complete it made her feel visible in a way she had never experienced. She thought about both of them, and that was the part that frightened her. Two of the Briggs boys are chasing you, June observed one morning, sliding a latte across the counter with the casual precision of a bartender in a Western saloon. Both of them. And do not pretend to be surprised because the only person in this town who has not noticed is Dolores, and that is only because she has been distracted by a rumor about the pastor's cat. They are not chasing me. Colton brought vegetables. Beckett drinks coffee. Colton Briggs has never brought vegetables to anyone in his life. That man would sooner give away a kidney than admit he cares about another human being. And Beckett has not voluntarily entered a coffee shop since 2019. They are chasing you, Lily. The question is whether you plan to let them catch you. It was a question she was not ready to answer. Not then, not yet. The invitation came from Beckett, a trail ride up the mountain. He led horseback tours for tourists during the summer months, but the season was over now, and this would be just the three of them. Colton needed to check fence lines on the upper property. Beckett could teach her to ride, Saturday morning if she was interested. She was interested. She had never been on a horse. Beckett taught her with a patience that seemed infinite, positioning her in the saddle, adjusting her grip on the reins, showing her how to communicate with the animal through her legs and her weight and her breath. His hands were warm when they corrected her posture, and he always told her what he was going to do before he did it, giving her time to prepare to consent to say no if she needed to. Relax your hips, he said, walking beside her horse as they started up the trail. Let your body move with the rhythm. Trust the animal. She will not let you fall. Colton rode ahead, leading the way through a forest of lodgepole pines and aspens, already turning gold, following a trail that wound upward through switchbacks and stream crossings and meadows where the grass was still green despite the approaching winter. He rode the way he did everything with a quiet competence that made difficult things look effortless, his body moving with the horse as if they were one organism. Occasionally he looked back, checking on her. And each time his eyes found hers, Lily felt something tighten in her chest, a thread being pulled, drawing her toward him in ways she did not fully understand and could not have explained if June had asked her to. The ridge appeared after 2 hours of climbing. They emerged from the tree line onto a bald granite outcrop, and the world opened up beneath them like a door swung wide. The valley stretched in every direction, a patchwork of green and gold and rust, bisected by a river that caught the morning light and threw it back in silver flashes. Mountains rose on every side, their peaks white with early snow, their flanks dark with forests that had been growing for centuries. The sky above was so blue it looked impossible, so vast it made Lily feel simultaneously tiny and infinite. This is where Mom used to come, Colton said. He had dismounted and was standing at the edge, his face softer than she had ever seen it. Every Sunday, rain or snow, she said this was where she talked to King and actually believed he was listening. She was right, Lily whispered, and she meant it. Standing here with the wind carrying the smell of pine and cold water, and distance with the world spread beneath her, like a prayer answered, she understood for the first time what her mother's faith was supposed to feel like. Not the cramped, suffocating obligation of Wednesday circles and Sunday guilt, but this vastness, freedom, the terrifying, beautiful certainty that there was something larger than your own small life. They ate lunch on the ridge, sandwiches. Beckett had packed coffee from a thermos, apples that Colton cut with a pocket knife, holding each slice out on the flat of the blade for her to take. They talked about the ranch, about the land, about Maggie and Walt, and the life that had been built here over generations. Colton said more in that hour than he had said in all their previous conversations combined, and Lily understood that this place unlocked something in him, that the mountains gave him permission to be someone he could not be at lower elevations. The ride down changed everything. They were 40 minutes from the ranch when the wolves appeared. Not one. A pack of 4 or 5 gray and lean standing in the timber about 30 yards from the trail. They were not hunting. They were watching, but Lily's horse did not care about the distinction. The mare caught their scent and exploded, rearing up with a scream that sounded almost human, front hooves slashing at the air. Lily had no experience, no muscle memory, no instinct for what to do. She grabbed the saddle horn, but her hands were too slow, her balance too precarious. She felt herself going sideways, felt gravity take her, felt the sickening certainty of falling. Colton moved faster than physics should have allowed. He was off his horse and beside hers before Lily had finished falling, his arms catching her around the waist, pulling her against his chest, absorbing the impact of her body with his own. They went down together, Colton twisting, so his back hit the ground, and Lily landed on top of him, shielded from the frozen earth by his body. Beckett had the mare's reins in seconds, pulling the horse's head down, forcing her to stop rearing. With his other hand, he drew the rifle from his saddle scabbard and fired into the air. The shot cracked across the valley like a whip, and the wolves vanished into the timber like smoke. Silence, except for breathing. Colton's arms were still around her. His chest rose and fell against her back, his heartbeat rapid but steady, his breath warm on her neck. She could feel the strength in his grip, controlled power of arms that could crush but were choosing instead to cradle. "I have got you," he said, low, certain, a voice that left no room for doubt. "I will not let you fall." He helped her up. His hands on her arms were gentle in a way that contradicted everything about his size and strength, checking her for injury with the efficient concern of someone who had triaged wounds in places far worse than a Montana trail. Beckett was at her other side in moments, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes scanning her from head to toe. "Are you okay? Anything hurt? Can you move everything?" "I am fine," she said, but her hand was gripping Colton's forearm and she was not letting go. She could not let go. And from the way Beckett's eyes dropped to that contact to her fingers wrapped around his brother's wrist, she knew he saw it. She waited for jealousy, for competition, for the tension that should exist when two brothers watch a woman choose one of them over the other. Instead, Beckett looked at Colton, and Colton looked at Beckett, and something passed between them. Some communication that used no words and needed none. A recognition, an agreement, a decision made in the space between one heartbeat and the next. Lily did not understand what that look meant. Not yet, but she would. Beckett helped her onto his horse for the ride back, steadying her with hands that were warm and sure. Colton rode close beside them the entire way, his horse nearly touching theirs, his eyes alternating between the trail ahead and Lily's face, as if he needed to verify every few seconds that she was still there, still safe, still real. By the time they reached the ranch, the sun was setting behind the mountains, and the sky was burning in shades of red and orange that made the whole valley look like it was on fire. Lily dismounted on legs that trembled from adrenaline and exertion and stood between the two brothers in the fading light and knew with absolute terrifying certainty that her life in Elk Ridge was going to be nothing like what she had planned. It was going to be so much more. That evening, after Beckett had driven her back to her cabin and walked her to the door with a gentleness that made her chest ache after Colton had raised one hand in farewell from the truck window with an expression that somehow managed to be both guarded and hopeful. Lily sat on the edge of her bed and pressed her hands against her face and tried to make sense of what was happening inside her. She was not supposed to feel this way. She was not supposed to feel anything. She had come to Elk Ridge to be independent, to prove that she could exist on her own terms, to build a life that belonged to no one but her. She had not come here to fall for anyone, and she certainly had not come here to fall for two men at the same time. But there it was, undeniable. She felt something for Colton that was like standing in front of a fire on the coldest night of the year, a warmth so deep and essential it reached places inside her that she had not known were frozen. And she felt something for Beckett that was like stepping outside on the first warm day of spring, an aliveness, a joy, a sense that the world was bigger and brighter and more full of possibility than she had ever allowed herself to believe. Two men, two feelings, both real, both growing, both utterly impossible. She thought about calling June. She thought about calling her mother. She thought about getting in her newly repaired car and driving back to Denver and David Calloway, and a life where the most dangerous thing that could happen to her was boredom. Instead, she lay in bed and listened to the wind moving through the pines outside her window and thought about a woman in a photograph standing on a mountain ridge and two sons who had kept her promise and a ranch that felt more like home after a single dinner than any place Lily had ever lived. She did not sleep until very late. And when she did, she dreamed of wolves and snow and a man's arms catching her before she hit the ground. In town the next week at Dolores Pruitt's general store, she met Nolan Pratt for the first time. He was standing by the register when she walked in, tall and groomed in a way that stood out in Elk Ridge like a sports car in a parking lot full of pickup trucks. Clean-shaven dark hair styled with a product, wearing a ranch jacket that had clearly never seen actual ranch work. His smile when he turned it on her was calibrated for maximum charm, all white teeth and eye contact, and a slight forward lean that suggested she was the most interesting person he had encountered in months. "You must be the new accountant," he said, extending a hand. "Nolan Pratt. My family has the property just north of the Briggs place. Welcome to Elk Ridge." His handshake was a fraction too long. His eyes stayed on her face a fraction too intently. Everything about him was a fraction too much like a photograph that has been retouched so aggressively it no longer looks like a real person. "Lily Mercer," she said, extracting her hand. "I have heard about you," he continued, leaning against the counter with practiced ease. "Small town, word travels. They say you are settling in nicely." Behind him, Dolores Pruitt watched the exchange with the avid attention of a woman who was already composing the version of this story she would tell 3 different people before noon. After Nolan left, June, who had been browsing the canned goods aisle and eavesdropping without shame, appeared at Lily's elbow. "Stay away from that one," June said quietly. "Mouth is honey, hands are knives." Lily learned more that week in fragments and whispers and the careful way people in small towns share dangerous information. Nolan's father, Russell Pratt, owned the largest ranch in the valley. When Walt Briggs died, Russell had approached Colton and Beckett within weeks, offering to buy their land at a price that was technically legal but morally obscene, taking advantage of 2 young men drowning in grief and debt and the sudden weight of a ranch they were not yet ready to run alone. They had refused, and the Pratt family had not forgotten. "Russell Pratt does not forgive, and he does not forget," June told her over lattes one evening, her voice uncharacteristically serious. "And Nolan is his father's son. Whatever he wants from you, it is not just about you. It is about that land. It has always been about that land." Lily stored this information the way she stored everything, carefully, precisely, in mental files that she could access later when the pattern became clear. But the pattern was already becoming clear. She just was not ready to see it yet. What she could not store, what she could not file away, or analyze, or reduce to numbers in a spreadsheet, was the way she felt every time Colton Briggs walked into a room. The way her pulse jumped when Beckett's name appeared on her phone. The way that both of them, separately and together, made her feel like she was waking up from a sleep she had not known she was in. Something was beginning. Something that would demand more courage than she had ever needed in her careful, cautious, perfectly controlled life. And far below the mountains, in a house that was too large for 2 men who did not know how empty it had been, until a woman with auburn hair and green eyes sat at their kitchen table and made it feel like home. Colton Briggs lay awake in the dark and listened to his brother's breathing in the next room and thought about a pair of hands gripping his forearm on a mountain trail. Holding on like letting go was not an option. His hands resting on his chest were still for the first time in months. The first kiss happened on a Thursday evening, 17 days after Lily Mercer's car died on County Road 12, and changed the trajectory of 3 lives that had been moving in parallel without knowing they were destined to collide. Beckett kissed her first. He was always the braver one when it came to matters of the heart, the one who reached while Colton waited, the one who spoke while his brother chose silence. They were sitting on the porch of the ranch house after dinner, the sky above them darkening from violet to black, the first stars appearing one by one like small fires being lit across an infinite field. The air smelled like wood smoke and cold earth and the last of the autumn sage that grew wild along the fence line. He had been telling her a story about a horse he trained 2 summers ago, a Mustang so wild and distrustful that it took Beckett 3 weeks just to get the animal to eat from his hand. The story was funny in the way Beckett made everything funny, full of self-deprecating humor, and dramatic pauses and sound effects that made Lily laugh until her ribs ached. But underneath the comedy, there was something else, a philosophy. Beckett was telling her without telling her how he understood trust, how he believed it could only be earned through patience and consistency and the willingness to show up every single day even when the other being wanted nothing to do with you. When the laughter faded, he looked at her. Not with the easy charm he wore like armor, with something underneath it, something unprotected. "Can I kiss you?" he asked. 3 words, simple and direct and carrying enough voltage to stop her heart for a full beat. She nodded. She could not speak. 24 years of never being kissed, and the moment was finally here, and her voice had abandoned her entirely, leaving her with nothing but a nod and a pulse that hammered so hard she was certain he could hear it. Beckett leaned in slowly, giving her time to change her mind, to pull back to say, wait or no or not yet. She did none of those things. His lips touched hers and the world went very quiet as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. The kiss was soft, gentle, so careful and tender that Lily felt tears burn behind her closed eyes, not from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization that this was what she had been missing. This warmth, this connection, this feeling of being wanted by someone who had asked permission first. When he pulled back his forehead resting against hers, his hand cupping her jaw with a lightness that made her feel precious rather than fragile. Beckett whispered, worth the wait. She cried. She could not help it. Help. Not sobbing, not dramatic tears, just a quiet overflow of everything she had been holding inside for 24 years, of being told that desire was dangerous, that wanting was weakness, that a good woman waited for God to deliver the right man to her door rather than reaching for one herself. She had reached, and the sky had not fallen, and the man holding her face in his hands was looking at her tears, not with alarm, but with a kind of reverent understanding, as if he knew exactly what they cost her and valued them accordingly. The next day, Colton kissed her in the barn. It was not planned. She had come to help with the morning feeding, something she had started doing on weekends, because she loved the smell of hay and the sound of horses and the way the barn felt like a cathedral at dawn, all golden light and dust motes, and the holy quiet of animals breathing. Colton was in the tack room repairing a bridle, his hands moving with their usual precision, despite the tremor that came and went like weather. She brought him coffee, black, no sugar. She had learned how he took it without asking, the same way she had learned that he woke before 5 every morning, that he checked the perimeter of the ranch before breakfast, like a soldier checking a defensive position, that he read history books about the Civil War and underlined passages with a pencil and never dog-eared the pages, because he believed books deserve respect. He took the coffee. Their fingers touched during the exchange, and neither of them pulled away. Thank you, he said. And then he looked at her, really looked in that way he had, that made her feel like she was standing under a searchlight, every flaw and every strength visible simultaneously. She did not ask permission. She did not need to. The permission was in his eyes, had been there for weeks, patient and certain, and waiting for her to be ready. She rose on her toes and kissed him. And where Beckett's kiss had been soft and exploratory, Colton's was something else entirely. Deep, slow, deliberate. He kissed her the way he did everything, with complete focus and absolute commitment, his hand sliding into her hair, his other arm coming around her waist, pulling her against him with a strength that was controlled but unmistakable. He kissed her like a promise, like a man who had decided something and would not be moved from that decision by any force on earth. When they separated, his breathing was unsteady for the first time since she had known him. His hand, still tangled in her hair, was perfectly still. No tremor, no shake. As if touching her had quieted something inside him that nothing else could reach. I have been wanting to do that, he said, since you grabbed my arm on that trail and did not let go. Why did you wait? Because you needed to come to me, not the other way around. He understood her, not just what she wanted, but what she needed, which was something far more complicated and infinitely more valuable. He understood that a woman who had spent her entire life being told what to feel needed the space to discover her own feelings on her own terms. And he had given her that space, even though the waiting must have been its own kind of torture. The weeks that followed established a rhythm that felt as natural as the seasons changing outside the ranch house windows. Mornings with Colton were quiet. They sat on the porch before dawn, 2 cups of coffee, watching the sky lighten behind the mountains. He did not talk much during these hours, and she did not need him to. The silence between them was not empty. It was full of trust and proximity and the particular intimacy of 2 people who are comfortable enough with each other to exist without performance. Afternoons with Beckett were alive. He taught her to ride properly, graduating her from gentle trail walks to actual cantering, celebrating each milestone with whoops and laughter that echoed off the valley walls. He told her stories about every horse on the ranch, giving them personalities and histories that were probably 70% invented, but 100% entertaining. He made her brave, made her willing to try things that scared her, made her believe that the worst possible outcome of any risk was a good story. Evenings were for all three of them. They cooked together in the big kitchen, Colton following recipes with military precision, Beckett improvising with spices in ways that were either brilliant or catastrophic with very little middle ground, Lily managing logistics and preventing small fires, both literal and culinary. They ate at the long wooden table that Walt Briggs had built 40 years ago, talking about the ranch and the town and the future. And after dinner, they sat in the living room where Colton read, and Lily worked on the ranch's hopelessly disorganized financial records. And Beckett played guitar, surprising her with a talent that transformed him from class clown to something approaching an artist, his fingers finding melodies that were shown and beautiful and full of a depth he rarely showed any other way. She was falling in love. She knew it the way you know the season is changing, not because of any single dramatic sign, but because of 1,000 small shifts in the light and temperature of every ordinary day. She loved Colton's steadiness the way he was the ground beneath her feet, solid and unwavering, and there. She loved Beckett's brightness the way he was the wind at her back, pushing her forward into a version of herself she had not known existed. Separately, they were remarkable men. Together, they were a home. But homes can be broken into, and the first assault came not with fists, but with whispers. Dolores Pruitt saw Lily kiss Beckett outside the general store on a Saturday afternoon. It was a quick kiss, impulsive Beckett leaning down from the truck window to press his lips to hers before driving back to the ranch. Innocent by any reasonable standard. But Dolores Pruitt did not operate by reasonable standards. She operated by the standards of a woman who had made information management her life's work, and who understood that in a town of 2,000 people, the right piece of gossip deployed at the right moment was worth more than money. 2 days later, Dolores saw Lily holding Colton's hand at the farmer's market. Fingers interlaced, public, unmistakable. Dolores did not need to be a mathematician to calculate what this meant, and she was not the kind of woman who kept calculations to herself. Within a week, every person in Elk Ridge had heard some version of the story. The new accountant was involved with the Briggs twins. Both of them. At the same time, the versions varied in their details and their degree of scandal, from the relatively tame "she is dating one" and stringing the other along to the significantly more creative "they share her like they share everything else," but the core message was consistent. Something improper was happening at Briggs Ranch, and the woman at the center of it was the outsider from Denver, who had been in town less than 2 months. The reaction split the community like a blade through wet wood. Some people, mostly the younger families and the ranchers who had known Colton and Beckett since childhood, shrugged it off. The Briggs boys were good men. They kept their fences mended and their cattle fed, and they showed up when neighbors needed help. What they did in their private lives was their business. Others, particularly the church congregation and the older generation that Dolores Pruitt both represented and controlled, were less forgiving. The whispers took on a sharper edge. Words like immoral and shameful, and that poor girl being taken advantage of, circulated through prayer meetings and grocery aisles in the parking lot after Sunday services. And Nolan Pratt, who had been watching from a careful distance, saw an opportunity open like a door. The first call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Lily was at her desk in the county assessor's office, working through a stack of property tax assessments, when her supervisor appeared in her doorway with an expression that combined discomfort and official duty in equal measure. "Lily, can I see you in my office?" The conversation was brief and devastating. A formal complaint had been filed regarding a conflict of interest. Lily was processing property records for Briggs Ranch while maintaining a personal relationship with the ranch's owners. The complaint cited specific regulations, specific dates, specific transactions. It was thorough in a way that it suggested professional preparation rather than neighborly concern. "I am not firing you," her supervisor said, and the fact that he felt the need to state this explicitly told Lily how close to that edge she actually was. "But I am reassigning you. Someone else will handle the Briggs files going forward." Guardiana. And Lily, I would strongly recommend being more careful about the appearance of impropriety. The word impropriety landed on her chest like a stone. She nodded, thanked him for his understanding, walked to the bathroom, locked the stall door, and pressed her forehead against the cold tile wall until she trusted herself not to cry in a government building. She knew who had filed the complaint. She did not need to see the signature. Nolan Pratt's second move was more precise and considerably more cruel. He contacted Vera Mercer. The network that connected them was invisible but efficient, the kind of informal infrastructure that exists within conservative church communities across America, where congregations in different states are linked by shared denominations, shared values, and shared address books. Nolan had done his research. He knew Lily's mother attended Faith Community Church in Aurora. He knew the pastor there. He knew that a phone call from a concerned Christian in Montana about the spiritual welfare of a young woman from the congregation would be received not as gossip, but as pastoral duty. The details he provided were accurate enough to be credible and slanted enough to be devastating. Two men, both at once, living at their ranch, abandoned her faith, her community, everything her mother taught her. Vera Mercer called on a Wednesday evening. Lily was at the ranch helping Beckett with dinner, while Colton was outside checking on a horse with a swollen fetlock. She saw her mother's name on the screen and felt her stomach drop the way it does when you are standing on solid ground and the ground suddenly is not solid anymore. "Hi, Mom." Lily and Grace Mercer. Full name, the weapon her mother deployed when disappointment exceeded the capacity of ordinary speech. "Tell me it is not true. Tell me the things I am hearing are lies." "What things, Mom?" "You know what things. Two men, Lily and two, and that what I raised you to become? Is that what all those years of teaching you right from wrong, all those Sundays, all those prayers, is this what they amount to?" Vera was crying, not the performative tears she sometimes used as a tool of persuasion, but real ones, the kind that came from a place of genuine anguish, and that made them infinitely worse. Because Lily could defend herself against manipulation. She could not defend herself against her mother's authentic heartbreak. "Mom, please listen to me. Pastor Richards asked me if you are being taken advantage of, if these men are manipulating you." I did not know what to say. I did not know what to tell him because my daughter, the girl I raised in faith, the girl I protected from every bad thing in this world, is apparently living in sin with two men in some godforsaken mountain town and did not even have the decency to tell her own mother. "I was going to tell you. I was waiting for the right time. The right time was before you threw away everything I taught you. The right time was before you humiliated me in front of my entire church. Do you know what people are saying? Do you know what they think of me now, of you?" The call lasted 11 minutes. It felt like 11 years. By the end, Vera was sobbing too hard to speak, and Lily was standing in the bathroom with the door closed, her phone pressed against her ear, tears running silently down her face as she said, "I love you, Mom, and I will call you soon," and heard nothing in response but the click of disconnection. Beckett found her 20 minutes later, sitting on the bathroom floor with her back against the tub and her knees drawn to her chest. He did not ask what happened. He sat down beside her, close but not touching, and waited. "My mom knows," Lily said. Her voice sounded flat and far away, like it belonged to someone watching this scene from a great distance. "Someone told her about us, about all of it." "Nolan," Beckett said. It was not a question. "Probably." "I will kill him." "No, you will not, because that is exactly what he wants. He wants a reaction. He wants chaos. He wants us to fall apart." But the damage was done, and in the days that followed, it metastasized. The canceled tour bookings hit first. Beckett's horse trail business, which had been the ranch's most reliable income stream, saw 7 cancellations in a single week. The clients were polite about it. Family plans changed. Schedule conflict. Maybe next season. But the pattern was unmistakable, and when Beckett drove into town to pick up supplies and saw Nolan Pratt chatting with 2 of his former clients outside the feed store, the cause became unmistakable too. The assessor's office complaint was public record. Small-town public record, Dolores Pruitt. Within 48 hours, Lily's professional humiliation was common knowledge. The new girl got disciplined because she was sleeping with the Briggs twins and could not keep her personal life out of her work. The cumulative weight of it was crushing. Professional consequences, family rupture, social judgment, income loss, each one manageable alone. Together, they formed a pressure that found every crack in Lily's newly built confidence and drove into it like water into stone. On a Friday evening 2 weeks after her mother's call, Lily sat across the kitchen table from Colton and Beckett and said the words she had been rehearsing in her head for 3 days. I need space. I need to go back to my cabin for a while and think. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. Beckett opened his mouth to argue, and Colton put a hand on his brother's arm. A small gesture, a warning. Not now. How long? Colton asked. His voice was controlled in the way that meant he was controlling everything else too. The fear, the frustration, the impulse to fight for her, the way he had fought for her on the mountain trail when the wolves came. I do not know. I just need to think. Without the pressure, without the judgment, without feeling like every choice I make hurts someone. She left that night, drove the 4 miles to her cabin with her hands shaking on the wheel and her vision blurred by tears and a voice in her head that sounded exactly like her mother saying, I told you so. I told you this would happen. I told you that wanting too much would only leave you with nothing. Colton sent one text message the next morning. It read, nothing changes between us if you say no. You will always have two friends here. Beckett sent one the following day. It read, we are still here, not going anywhere. Take your time. The respect in those messages, the restraint, the willingness to let her go without guilt or pressure or emotional manipulation. It was so different from everything she had experienced in her previous life, where love was always conditional and affection always came with strings, and the price of belonging was the surrender of your own judgment. And that was precisely what broke through her walls, not the grand gestures, not the passionate declarations, the patience, the willingness to wait, the quiet, unshakable faith that she was worth waiting for. But first things had to get worse. The 2 weeks Lily spent in her cabin were the longest of her life. She went to work, she came home, she ate meals that tasted like cardboard and slept in a bed that felt too empty and too cold and too quiet. She missed them with a physical ache that lived beneath her ribs, a constant reminder that something essential had been removed from her daily existence. June found her on day 4 sitting in the back booth of the coffee shop after hours staring at a cold latte she had not touched. Okay, June said, sliding into the booth across from her with the directness of a woman who had reached the limit of her patience with watching her friend self-destruct. We need to talk about what you are doing. I am thinking. I said I needed to think. You are not thinking. You are hiding. There is a difference. Thinking involves actually examining your feelings and making a decision. Hiding involves sitting in the dark, replaying your mother's phone call on a loop and convincing yourself that the safest choice is also the right one. Maybe the safest choice is the right one. When has the safest choice ever made you happy? You spent 24 years making the safest choice. You went to the college your mother approved of. You studied the major your mother approved of. You dated nobody because your mother had not approved of anyone yet. And where did all that safety get you on a highway to Elk Ridge at age 24, having never been kissed? The words hit like cold water. Lily stared at her. June leaned forward. You are letting Nolan Pratt, a man you do not respect and who does not respect you, decide the course of your life. You are letting your mother, who loves you but has never understood, you choose your future. And you are letting this town, which will forget about this scandal, the minute someone else does something interesting, destroy the best thing that has ever happened to you. What if everyone is right? What if this is wrong? Then everyone is wrong, or you are wrong, but at least it should be your choice, not a choice made by fear. Lily left the coffee shop and drove. Not to the ranch, not to her cabin. She drove up the mountain road, the one Colton and Beckett had taken her on that first ride, winding through the switchbacks, until she reached the ridge where Maggie Briggs used to talk to God. She parked and sat in her car and looked at the valley below, the patchwork of green and gold now beginning to fade toward the browns and grays of approaching winter. The mountains stood exactly as they had for millions of years, indifferent to the small human drama unfolding in their shadow. The river still caught the light. The wind still moved through the pines. She thought about her mother, about the life Vera had built for her, wall by wall, rule by rule, constructed from love and fear in equal measure. Vera was not a bad mother. She was a frightened one. A woman whose husband had walked out when Lily was 12, leaving Vera alone with a daughter and a mortgage, and a faith that had to be strong enough to replace everything else because everything else was gone. Vera had taught Lily to be afraid. Afraid of men, afraid of desire, afraid of any emotion that could not be contained within the approved boundaries of church and duty and quiet female compliance. And Lily had learned those lessons so well that she had arrived at adulthood with a heart wrapped in so many layers of protection that nothing could get in. Until Colton and Beckett Briggs, who had gotten in not by breaking through her walls, but by being so patient and so genuine and so consistently present that the walls had simply become irrelevant. She thought about fear, about how she had spent her entire life obeying it, following its instructions, allowing it to map her route through the world. Fear had kept her safe. Fear had also kept her empty. She thought about the night Colton stood on the porch at 2 in the morning, shaking fighting demons she could not see. He was afraid too, every night. But every morning he got up and fed the horses and mended the fences and held his brother's ranch together with hands that trembled. He did not let fear make his decisions. He made his decisions despite fear. That was the difference. That was the lesson she had been too scared to learn. She was not going to run anymore. Not from Nolan Pratt, not from Dolores Pruitt, not from her mother's tears, and not from the two men who had offered her something she had never had and might never find again. The drive down the mountain took 20 minutes. The decision had taken less than 5 seconds. Everything between the question and the answer had been noise. Lily did not go quietly back to the ranch and slip into the old rhythm. She did something she had never done in her 24 careful, cautious, obedient years. She fought. She started at June's Brew on a Monday morning, 9:30, when the coffee shop was full of its usual crowd. Ranchers, retirees, a few women from the church auxiliary committee, and Dolores Pruitt holding court at her usual table by the window with a muffin and an audience. Lily walked in carrying a manila folder. Inside the folder were documents she had spent the previous weekend assembling with the meticulous attention to detail that made her an excellent accountant and, as it turned out, an even better investigator. Copies of the complaint filed against her at the assessor's office, annotated with notes showing that the specific regulations cited did not actually apply to her situation. A printout of a text message. Her mother had inadvertently forwarded a message originating from a phone number registered to Pratt Ranch, LLC, containing details about Lily's personal life that could only have been gathered through deliberate surveillance, and a public records request she had filed the previous Thursday revealing that Nolan Pratt had submitted 3 separate complaints about Briggs Ranch to various county agencies in the past 6 weeks, all of them baseless, all of them designed to harass. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She stood near the counter where everyone could see and hear her, and she spoke with the calm precision of a woman presenting quarterly earnings to a board of directors. My name is Lily Mercer. Most of you have heard things about me over the past few weeks. Some of those things are true. I am in a relationship with Colton and Beckett Briggs. Both of them. That is my choice made freely as an adult. I am not being manipulated. I am not confused. I am not a victim. The coffee shop had gone silent. Even the espresso machine seemed to be holding its breath. What I am is the target of a deliberate campaign by Nolan Pratt. Not because he cares about my morality or yours, because his family wants the Briggs land, has wanted it for years, and I am convenient ammunition. She laid the folder on the counter. The evidence is here for anyone who would like to form their own opinion based on facts rather than gossip. Dolores Pruitt's muffin sat untouched on her plate. Her mouth was slightly open, which may have been the first time in her life that Dolores Pruitt had been rendered speechless. Nolan Pratt was not in the coffee shop, but in a town of 2,000 he heard about it before Lily had finished her second sentence. And what he heard made him angry in the specific, dangerous way of men who are accustomed to controlling narratives and discover that the narrative has slipped out of their hands. From the ranch, she drove straight to Briggs Ranch. The 4 miles felt like 100. Her hands were steady on the wheel, but her heart was beating so hard she could feel it in her throat. Colton was repairing a section of fence near the barn. Beckett was in the paddock working a young horse on a lunge line. Both stopped when they saw her car. Both stood very still, the way animals stand when they sense something significant approaching, but cannot yet determine whether it is danger or deliverance. She walked to them, not slowly, not hesitantly. She walked with the stride of a woman who had made a decision on a mountain ridge and was done second-guessing it. I was wrong to run, she said. Her voice did not shake. She had used up her allotment of shaking. I was scared, and instead of telling you I was scared, I disappeared. That was not fair to you, either of you, and I am done doing it." Beckett dropped the lunge line. The horse Freed trotted to the far end of the paddock and watched with mild interest. "I am not promising I will never be afraid again," she continued. "I am promising that when I am afraid, I will be afraid here, with you, not in a cabin by myself pretending the fear goes away if I have enough space to hide from it." Beckett reached her first. He always reached first. His arms came around her, and he held on with a fierceness that compressed her lungs, and she did not care. She pressed closer, breathed him in, felt the solidity of him, and the warmth and the absolute certainty of his grip. Then Colton was there. He did not embrace her the way Beckett did. He stepped close, lifted her chin with two fingers, and looked into her eyes with an expression that was simultaneously the most vulnerable and the most determined thing she had ever seen on a human face. "Do not promise not to be scared," he said. "Promise that when you are scared, you will be scared with us." Then he kissed her. It was the first time Colton had initiated a kiss, and he did it in front of his brother in the open air of the ranch yard with the mountains as witnesses and not an ounce of hesitation in his body. When they pulled apart, Beckett was grinning. "Does this mean I can stop pretending I have not been miserable for 2 weeks?" "You were not pretending," Colton said. "You burnt 3 dinners and yelled at a horse." "I did not yell at the horse. I had a firm conversation with the horse." Lily laughed. It came from somewhere deep and real and slightly broken, the laugh of a woman who had been carrying a weight she did not realize was there until she set it down. She was standing in the ranch yard with dirt on her boots and tears on her face, and 2 men looking at her like she was the answer to a question they had been asking their whole lives, and she was laughing, and it was the most honest sound she had made in years. That night, Lily told them the full truth about Denver. They sat on the porch, wrapped in blankets, against the October cold, and she told them about Vera, about David Calloway and his insurance job and his perfectly parted hair, about the slow, suffocating pressure of a life designed by someone else, about the day she saw the job posting and felt for the first time in her adult life something that might have been hope. "I did not come to Elk Ridge for adventure," she said, staring at the stars because it was easier than looking at their faces. "I came because if I stayed in Denver one more month, I would have said yes to marrying a man I did not love just to make my mother stop crying." Silence. The kind of silence that holds space for pain. "I ran away from a wedding I did not choose," she continued, "and I found 2 men I want to choose. That is the whole story. The virgin bride who ran away to the mountains." Colton's hand found hers in the dark. His grip was warm and steady. "You did not run away," he said quietly. "You ran toward." The moment cracked something open inside her, a fault line she had been standing on since she was 12 years old, and her father left and her mother drew the borders of the world so tight that there was no room left to breathe. She leaned into Colton's side and felt Beckett's arm come around her from the other direction, and for a long time the three of them sat there in the cold, holding on, letting the silence do the work that words could not. But silence in a town like Elk Ridge was a luxury that Nolan Pratt would not allow them. The news arrived on a Thursday morning in a phone call from the Elk Ridge branch of First Mountain Bank. Polite, professional, devastating. "Mr. Briggs, I am calling to inform you that your ranch operating loan and the outstanding balance on your property tax deferment have been acquired by a third party, Pratt Holdings, LC. The terms remain unchanged, but you should be aware that the new holder has the right to call the full balance due with 30 days' notice." Colton listened, said thank you, hung up. Then he stood very still in the kitchen for a long time, his hand gripping the back of a chair so hard that the wood creaked under the pressure. Beckett found him there 10 minutes later. Read the situation from his brother's posture, from the white knuckles and the locked jaw, and the particular quality of stillness that meant Colton was containing something explosive. "How bad?" "Pratt bought our debt, the ranch loan, the tax deferment, all of it." "How much?" $212,000, due in 30 days. The number hung in the kitchen air like smoke. $212,000. They did not have it. The ranch was profitable enough to cover operating expenses and put food on the table, but it did not generate the kind of surplus that could absorb a 6-figure demand in a single month. He cannot do this. He can. It is legal. Banks sell debt all the time. Pratt just made sure he was the buyer. "This is not about the money, is it?" Colton finally looked at his brother. This was never about the money. It was never about Lily. Not really. This is about Dad saying no. 10 years ago, Russell Pratt made an offer on this land, and our father told him to go to hell, and Pratt never forgave it. Nolan is just the face. Russell is the one pulling this. The shadow villain. The name Lily had been hearing in fragments and whispers since she arrived. Russell Pratt, 62 years old, retired from active ranch management, living in the big house on the hill, with the kind of patient, calculating anger that does not diminish with age, but concentrates like poison settling to the bottom of a well. And now he had them. Legally cleanly, with 30 days on a clock that had already started ticking. The same day Colton found the creek dry. He walked the fence line the way he did every morning, checking for damage, and at the northwest corner of the property where Slate Creek crossed from Prattland onto Briggsland, the water was gone. Not reduced, not diminished. Gone. The creek bed was a stripe of wet stones drying in the autumn sun. He followed it upstream, walked for 40 minutes through brush and timber until he reached the property line and saw what Russell Pratt had built. A dam. Not a large one, not an engineered structure, but a wall of earth and logs and rock sufficient to divert the creek's flow entirely onto Pratt land. Without Slate Creek, the Briggs cattle had no natural water source on the upper pasture. Without the creek, the irrigation system that fed the garden in the small orchard Maggie Briggs had planted 20 years ago would run dry within weeks. The dam was on Pratt property. Technically legal, or at least in the gray area where legality depends on who has the better lawyer. Colton stood at the dry creek bed and felt a rage so pure and so encompassing that his vision actually narrowed at the edges, the world contracting to a tunnel of fury with the dam at its center. His hands were not trembling now. They were fists. He walked back to the ranch. He did not run. Running would have meant losing control, and Colton Briggs had learned in places far more dangerous than Montana that the moment you lost control was the moment you died. Beckett's reaction was the opposite. Volcanic. Immediate. He grabbed his truck keys and was halfway to the door before Colton's voice stopped him cold. Sit down. I am going over there. I am going to tear that dam apart with my bare hands, and then I am going to find Nolan Pratt and tear him apart too. And then you will be in a cell and Pratt will have the ranch by Christmas. Sit down. Beckett did not sit down. He stood in the kitchen doorway, vibrating with a fury that had nowhere to go. And for the first time, Lily saw the brothers not as a seamless unit, but as two very different men with two very different responses to threat. Beckett wanted to fight. Colton wanted to think. Beckett's instinct was action. Colton's was strategy. You know what your problem is, Beckett said, his voice tight enough to snap. You are so scared of making things worse that you never make them better. You just stand there, absorbing, taking it. Like you took it over there, like you take everything. And one day, all that absorbed rage is going to eat you alive. The words landed like mortar shells. Lily saw Colton flinch, actually flinch, and she had never seen him flinch at anything. Not when the wolves came, not when Nolan Pratt stood in their yard making threats. Do not talk to me about what I absorbed over there. Colton's voice was very low, very quiet, very dangerous. You do not know what I absorbed. Then tell me, for once in your life, tell somebody something, instead of standing there like a stone wall pretending nothing gets through. Lily stepped between them. Not physically, they were too far apart for that, but with her voice, her presence, the simple act of being in the room and reminding them that they were not enemies. Stop, she said, firmly, not loud. You are doing exactly what Pratt wants. He wants you fighting each other instead of fighting him. Both brothers stopped, looked at her. And in that moment, something shifted, a recalibration, a recognition that there were three people in this fight now, not two, and the third one had a perspective that neither of them possessed. Give me the financial records, Lily said. All of them, every invoice, every contract, every tax document, every piece of paper this ranch has generated in the last 5 years. What are you going to do? Beckett asked. My job, she said. I am an accountant. Numbers are what I do. And if Russell Pratt wants to play this game with contracts and debt instruments and legal technicalities, then he is going to find out that he picked a fight with the wrong woman. She started that night. The kitchen table disappeared under boxes of documents that Colton hauled from a storage room in the barn. Receipts, bank statements, loan agreements, tax filings, correspondence with the county assessor's office, dating back to Walt Briggs's era. It was a mess. The record-keeping was the work of two men who understood cattle and horses and soil, but regarded paperwork as a necessary evil to be completed with minimum effort and maximum reluctance. Lily organized it, sorted it, cross-referenced it, built spreadsheets on her laptop that connected dates to transactions to entities with the precision of a forensic auditor. She worked through the night fueled by coffee that Colton kept refilling without being asked, and sandwiches that Beckett made and placed beside her without interrupting. By 3 in the morning, she had found something. The dam on Slate Creek violated Montana water rights law, specifically the doctrine of prior appropriation that governed water usage in the state. Briggs Ranch had been using Slate Creek for over 60 years, establishing a senior water right that superseded any claim Pratt might make to divert the flow. The dam was not merely gray area legal, it was illegal. By dawn, she had found more. The debt acquisition from the bank showed irregularities. The transfer price was significantly below market value, suggesting that Russell Pratt had either colluded with a bank officer to manipulate the sale or had used information that was not publicly available to time his purchase. Either way, it warranted investigation. By noon, she had built a case. Not a legal brief, she was not a lawyer, but a comprehensive, meticulously documented dossier that laid out the pattern. Russell Pratt's acquisition attempts going back a decade. The harassment campaign against 3 other small ranches in the valley, all of which had eventually sold to Pratt Holdings at distressed prices. The coordination between Nolan's social attacks on Lily and Russell's financial attacks on the ranch. The timeline that showed this was not a personal grudge, but a systematic land grab executed over years with patience and precision. She drove to the sheriff's office at 2 in the afternoon. Sheriff Tom Hadley looked at the folder she placed on his desk, then at her, then at the folder again. "This is a lot of paper, Miss Mercer." "It is a lot of evidence, Sheriff. Russell Pratt has been illegally diverting water-manipulating debt instruments and conducting a coordinated harassment campaign against Briggs Ranch and at least 3 other properties in this valley. I can show you the numbers." "Numbers," Hadley said, with the slow thoughtfulness of a man who had learned long ago that the truth usually hides in the details that most people find boring. "I like numbers." She showed him. Point by point, document by document, spreadsheet by spreadsheet. She showed him the water rights violation. She showed him the suspicious debt transfer. She showed him the pattern of complaints filed against Briggs Ranch, all traceable to Nolan Pratt, baseless, all designed to create a cumulative pressure that would force a sale. Hadley listened for 45 minutes without interruption. When she finished, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a long time. "You know," he said finally, "Russell Pratt has been operating in this valley like he owns it since before I pinned on this badge. Everybody knows. Nobody could prove it." He tapped the folder with one finger. "Until now." He picked up the phone and called the Montana Department of Natural Resources. Then he called the State Attorney General's office. Then he called Lily and said, "Go home, stay close to the phone, and Miss Mercer, yes, those boys are lucky to have you, both of them." She drove back to the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of amber and rust that made the mountains look like they were glowing from within. Colton was standing on the porch when she pulled in, the way he always stood on the porch, watching, waiting, keeping guard over the land his parents had entrusted to him. She got out of the car and walked toward him and saw something in his face she had not seen before. Not hope exactly. Something quieter than hope. Something closer to awe. "You went to the sheriff," he said. "I went to the sheriff." "With what?" "With everything. Every number, every date, every transaction that proves what the Pratt family has been doing to this valley for the last 10 years. The water rights violation alone is enough to force the dam down. The debt manipulation is enough for an investigation. And the pattern of harassment across multiple properties is enough to get the state attorney general interested." Colton looked at her for a long time. The man who never showed emotion. The man who held everything inside, who absorbed and endured and never broke. His eyes were bright, not with tears, with recognition, with the specific devastating gratitude of someone who has been fighting alone for so long that the arrival of reinforcements feels like a miracle. "You did not just protect the ranch," he said. "No," she said. "I protected our home." Behind them from inside the house, Beckett's voice carried through the open door. Is she back? Did it work? Somebody tell me something before I lose my mind. Colton's mouth did something it almost never did. It smiled. A real smile, and warm and unguarded, transforming his face from granite to something human and beautiful, and full of the kind of joy that only arrives after prolonged darkness. She is back, he called to his brother, without taking his eyes off Lily, and she just saved everything. But that night in the dark hours when the temperature dropped below freezing and the ranch house groaned against the wind, the sound of an engine came rumbling up the drive. Headlights cut through the darkness. Not one vehicle. Two. Nolan Pratt had found out about the sheriff. And Nolan Pratt, unlike his father, did not have the patience for legal maneuvering. He had come to settle this in person. And what happened next in the snow and the dark and the desperate arithmetic of three people against a threat that would not stop is where this story becomes something else entirely. But that is the next part. Before we move on, drop a comment and tell me what you would do in Lily's position. Would you fight or would you run? And if this story has meant something to you so far, that subscribe button is right there. I read every single comment, every one. The headlights came first. Two sets cutting through the falling snow, like the eyes of something predatory and patient swinging up the ranch drive in tandem, illuminating the fence posts and the barn wall, and the frozen mud and harsh white beams that turned the familiar landscape alien and hostile. Colton was already on his feet. He had not been sleeping. He rarely slept through the night anymore, and tonight the insomnia had been worse than usual, a low buzzing anxiety that had kept him at the kitchen table long after Lily and Beckett had gone to bed. He had been sitting in the dark drinking cold coffee, thinking about water rights and dead instruments and the specific mathematics of survival when the first engine sound reached him through the walls. He knew the sound of Nolan Pratt's truck. He had been listening for it consciously or not since the night Nolan had stood in this yard and said the words, "This is not over." A diesel engine with a particular knock in the third cylinder, a sound as identifiable to a man who lived by engines as a voice is to a man who lives by conversation. But there were two engines tonight, two trucks, and that changed the arithmetic entirely. He moved through the house without turning on lights. Retrieved the hunting rifle from above the door, the Winchester Model 70 that his father had mounted there the day they moved in, and that had hung in the same position for 30 years, cleaned and loaded and waiting for the moment when the things a man built needed defending, with something more than patience. The porch boards were cold under his boots. Snow was falling steadily now. The thick, wet flakes of a Montana October storm, the kind that accumulated fast and turned the world into a white blur within hours. He could see the trucks pulling to a stop at the end of the drive, about 40 yards from the house. Doors opened. Three figures emerged into the headlight beams, their breath visible in the cold air, their movements carrying the deliberate energy of men who had come to do something specific and were not planning to leave until it was done. Nolan Pratt was in front. Lily had been right about that. He had found out about the sheriff, about the evidence, about the neat and devastating case that a 24-year-old accountant had assembled from boxes of neglected paperwork. And Nolan, who had inherited his father's ambition, but not his father's patience, had decided that legal maneuvering was no longer sufficient. The two men behind him were ranch hands. Big men, the kind you hired not for their skill with cattle, but for their willingness to do things that polite society preferred not to acknowledge. One of them carried a length of chain. The other carried nothing visible, which in some ways was worse because it meant whatever he was carrying was concealed. Beckett appeared at Colton's shoulder, dressed in jeans and a thermal shirt, barefoot, his hair disordered from sleep that had been interrupted by the same engine sound. He assessed the situation in 3 seconds, the way brothers who have worked together their entire lives can communicate an entire tactical briefing in a glance. How many? 3, Nolan and 2 hired. Weapons, chain visible, 1 concealed, assume the worst. Lily, still inside, keep her there. But Lily was already awake, already moving, already standing in the hallway behind them, having heard the engines and the low, urgent exchange of voices, and having made the calculation that whatever was happening outside required her presence rather than her absence. She was wearing one of Colton's flannel shirts over her sleep clothes, her feet bare on the cold hardwood, her hair loose around her shoulders, and her eyes were wide but focused, alert in the way of someone whose body has flooded with adrenaline but whose mind is still operational. Get back inside, Colton said without turning around. No, the word was simple, final. She said it the way Colton said things, with the quiet authority of someone who has made a decision and will not be moved from it by any force available. Nolan's voice cut through the snowfall. Briggs, come on out. We need to talk about some paperwork that found its way to places it should not have gone. Colton stepped off the porch. He held the rifle at his side barrel pointed at the ground, a posture that communicated both capability and restraint. I have this. I would prefer not to use it, but I will. You are on my property, Pratt, after dark, with two men I do not know. That is not a conversation. That is trespassing. Nolan stopped about 15 feet from the porch. The snow was accumulating on his shoulders and his hair melting on the heat of his face. He did not look like the polished, calculated man who had smiled at Lily and Dolores Pruitt's store. He looked like what he actually was, a man whose carefully constructed plan was falling apart and who had decided to replace strategy with force. The paperwork, Briggs, whatever your little accountant put together, whatever she gave to Hadley, you are going to get it back. All of it. The copies, the spreadsheets, whatever she saved on her computer. Tonight. No, Colton said. You do not understand the situation. My father is not a patient man. He has been patient with you, with your father before you. But patience has limits, and you have found them. Your father is a thief. Your father has been stealing water and manipulating banks and squeezing honest ranchers off their land for a decade. And now there is a record of it. A detailed, documented, cross-reference record that is already in the hands of the sheriff in the state attorney general's office. Taking it from us changes nothing. It is already out there. The information landed on Nolan like a physical blow. His jaw tightened. His eyes, already hard, went flat and dark in a way that made Lily's blood cool several degrees. You are making a mistake, Nolan said. His voice had dropped, losing the performative confidence and revealing something underneath that was colder and more honest. A serious mistake, and it is not just your ranch on the line anymore. He looked past Colton, directly at Lily standing on the porch behind Beckett. She should not have gotten involved. That was the mistake. Getting her involved. Colton shifted his weight, a small movement almost imperceptible that placed his body more fully between Nolan's gaze and the porch where Lily stood. A human shield deployed without conscious thought, the instinct of a man whose training had taught him to position himself between threats and the people he protected. You are talking about her like she is a piece in your game, Colton said. She is not. She is the reason your game is over. What happened next occurred in the compressed time frame of violence, where seconds stretch into something elastic and every movement carries the weight of consequence. The man with the chain moved first. He came from Nolan's left fast for his size, swinging the chain in a low arc aimed at Colton's legs, a disabling strike designed to bring a man down without the mess of a direct assault. Colton saw it coming, the military training that had never fully left his nervous system, reading the shift in weight, the angle of the shoulder, the trajectory of the swing, and he sidestepped but not quite far enough. The chain caught his left forearm, wrapping around the flesh with a sound like a wet branch snapping, and the pain was immediate and enormous, a white flash that traveled from his wrist to his shoulder and lit up every nerve in between. Blood came fast. The chain links had torn through the flannel, and the skin beneath opening a gash that ran from his wrist to his elbow. Shallow but wide, the kind of wound that bled impressively, but was not immediately dangerous. Colton did not drop the rifle. He did not make a sound. He transferred the Winchester to his right hand, used his bleeding left to grab the chain that was still partially wrapped around his forearm and pulled. The man on the other end, unprepared for his target to pull rather than retreat, stumbled forward. Colton's right fist, still holding the rifle by the barrel, connected with the man's temple, using the wooden stock as a club. The man went down in the snow and did not get up. The second hired man was already moving toward the porch, toward Beckett, toward Lily. Beckett met him at the bottom step. The impact of the two bodies colliding was audible even over the wind, a solid thud of muscle meeting muscle that sent both men sprawling into the frozen mud. They rolled, grappled, traded blows with the graceless efficiency of men who were not trained fighters but who knew how to use their size and their rage. Beckett took a fist to the shoulder, the same shoulder he had injured in a riding accident 2 years prior, and the pain made him gasp, but it did not make him stop. He drove his knee into the man's midsection, heard the air go out of him, and followed with an elbow strike that ended the contest decisively. Nolan Pratt stood alone. 3 against 3 had become 1 against 2 in approximately 12 seconds, and the arithmetic was no longer in his favor. He reached into his jacket, and the motion, the specific angle of his hand moving toward his waistband, activated something in Colton's nervous system that bypassed conscious thought entirely. Every combat instinct he had spent years trying to bury came roaring to the surface, and in the space between one heartbeat and the next, he had the rifle up the stock against his shoulder. Despite the screaming pain in his left arm, the barrel aimed at Nolan's center mass. "Take your hand out of your jacket," Colton said, slowly, with nothing in it. Nolan froze. His hand stopped moving. For a long moment, the two men looked at each other through the falling snow, and the only sounds were the wind in their breathing and the low groaning of the man Beckett had put on the ground. Then a sound from the porch made all three conscious men turn. Lily had retrieved the shotgun from the mudroom. The 12-gauge that Walt Briggs had kept for coyotes, loaded with birdshot, its weight unfamiliar and terrible in her hands. She had never fired a gun in her life. She was not certain she could fire this one. Her arms trembled with the effort of holding it up, and her finger was nowhere near the trigger because she was terrified of what would happen if it accidentally made contact. But she held the gun. She pointed it in Nolan's general direction. And when she spoke, her voice carried across the yard with a clarity that cut through the storm. "I uploaded everything to cloud storage this afternoon. Every document, every spreadsheet, every email. If you burn this house to the ground, the evidence survives. If you take our computers, the evidence survives. It is already with the sheriff, the state AG, and a backup copy is sitting in an encrypted folder that my best friend has the password to. So this ends now, Nolan. Tonight, you leave this property and you never come back." Nolan looked at her, the girl from Denver, the accountant, the outsider who was supposed to be a vulnerability, a pressure point, a weakness in the Briggs armor that he could exploit. Instead, she had become the weapon that dismantled everything his family had spent a decade building. "You have no idea what you have started," he said. "I know exactly what I have started," Lily replied. "I started the end of your family taking whatever it wants from this valley. Now get off our land." Nolan Pratt looked at the rifle in Colton's hands, at the shotgun in Lily's, at his two hired men, one unconscious and one wheezing in the mud. He calculated the odds the way his father had taught him to calculate odds, with cold precision and without sentimentality. The odds were not favorable. He backed toward his truck, slowly, hands visible, his eyes never leaving Colton's face. "This is not over," he said. "Yes, it is," Colton replied. "You just do not know it yet." The trucks reversed down the drive. The taillights disappeared into the snow. The sound of the engines faded until there was nothing left but the wind and the falling snow, and the three of them standing in the yard, adrenaline crashing through their systems like a river through a broken dam. Colton lowered the rifle. His left arm hung at his side, blood running freely down his hand, dripping off his fingers into the snow, where it made small dark flowers that the storm immediately began to erase. Lily set the shotgun down on the porch railing. Her hands were shaking so violently, she was not certain she could have held it for another 30 seconds. She looked at the weapon, and then at her own trembling fingers, and felt a disorientation so complete that for a moment she was not sure if the last 5 minutes had actually happened, or if she had dreamed the whole thing from inside a life that had gone completely beyond the boundaries of anything she had imagined possible. Then Beckett said, "I think the horse is awake." And the absurdity of the observation, the deliberate normalcy of it, broke through the shock, and Lily heard herself laugh. A single sharp, slightly hysterical laugh that tasted like tears in relief, and the metallic edge of fear that was only now, after the danger had passed, beginning to fully register. They went inside. Lily bandaged Colton's arm at the kitchen table, cleaning the wound with steady hands that contradicted the terror still circulating through her bloodstream. The gash was ugly but clean, and Colton sat through the process without flinching, watching her work with an expression that was not quite gratitude and not quite wonder, but something in between that she had never seen on anyone's face before. "You picked up the gun," he said. "I did." "Have you ever held a gun before?" "No." "Your hands were shaking." "I know." "You were terrified." "I was terrified." "And you picked up the gun anyway." She tied off the bandage, looked up at him. His amber eyes, usually so carefully guarded, were wide open, stripped of every defense, and what she saw inside them was not the hardened veteran, or the silent protector, or the man who absorbed everything and showed nothing. What she saw was a man who was looking at her like she had just answered a question he had been carrying since he came home from Afghanistan with shaking hands and a head full of ghosts. The question was simple. Is there anyone in this world who will stand beside me when the worst comes? I was not going to let him hurt you, she said. Either of you. This is my home too. Colton pulled her toward him with his uninjured arm, pressed his face into her hair, held on. From the other side of the table, Beckett watched them. He was holding a bag of frozen peas against his swollen shoulder. His hair wild, his lips split from the fight, and he was smiling. Not his usual performative grin, not the charm he deployed as social currency, but something genuine and quiet and full of an emotion so large it did not fit comfortably on his face. We should probably call the sheriff, he said. They called Sheriff Hadley at 3 in the morning. He arrived in 40 minutes, which was fast for a man who usually did nothing without thinking about it from 9 different angles first. He took statements from all 3 of them, examined Colton's arm and Beckett's shoulder, photographed the unconscious ranch hand who was just beginning to stir in the yard, and listened to the entire account with the patient, meticulous attention of a man who understood that this was not a simple trespassing case, but the final piece in a much larger puzzle. I was already planning to act on the evidence Miss Mercer provided, Hadley said, standing in the kitchen, his hat in his hands. But this accelerates the timeline considerably. Assault, trespassing with intent, bringing armed men onto your property. Nolan just gave me everything I need to move on the Pratts without waiting for the state AG to finish their review. He paused, looked at the 3 of them, Colton with his bandaged arm, Beckett with his ice pack, Lily with her bare feet in her borrowed flannel shirt, and her eyes that were exhausted but burning with something that Hadley recognized because he had seen it in the mirror once, a long time ago, when he had decided to become the kind of law enforcement officer who actually enforced the law rather than just wearing the badge. Get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. Tomorrow was a long day. At 9 in the morning, Sheriff Hadley executed the warrant. He drove to Pratt Ranch with 2 deputies from the county and a liaison from the Montana Department of Natural Resources who had been awake since 5 reviewing the water rights documentation that Lily had compiled. They brought a second vehicle from the state attorney general's office, carrying an investigator who had spent the previous evening reading through the financial records and had used the words systematic fraud in his preliminary assessment. Russell Pratt was sitting in his study when they arrived, not surprised. He had been expecting them since Nolan had called at 3:30 that morning, raging about guns and accountants and plans falling apart. Russell had listened, told his son to go home and sleep, and then had sat in his leather chair with a glass of bourbon and waited for the inevitable with the composure of a man who had always known on some level that his empire was built on a foundation that would eventually be examined by someone with sharper eyes than the people he had been exploiting for a decade. He did not resist. He did not argue. He stood when the deputies entered, set down his glass with deliberate care, and extended his wrist with a dignity that was in its own way the most chilling thing about him. Even in defeat, Russell Pratt conducted himself like a man who believed the world owed him deference. "You know who I am," he said to Hadley. "I do," the sheriff replied, "and now the court will too." Nolan was arrested at his home. Unlike his father, he did not go quietly. There was shouting, there were threats. There was a moment when one of the deputies had to physically restrain him from lunging at the officer reading his rights. The contrast between father and son was stark and telling. Russell had been the architect, patient and strategic and cold. Nolan had been the instrument, effective only as long as someone else was directing his energy. Without his father's guidance, he was nothing but rage. The dam on Slate Creek was ordered removed by the Department of Natural Resources before noon. By evening, water was flowing back onto Briggs land, and the sound of the creek running past the northwest fence line was to Lily's ears the most beautiful music she had ever heard. The debt Russell Pratt had acquired was frozen by court order, pending investigation. The bank officer who had facilitated the below-market transfer was placed on administrative leave. 3 other ranching families in the valley received notification that the financial instruments held against their properties by Pratt Holdings were under review. In the span of a single day, the empire that Russell Pratt had spent 10 years building one bullied sale and one manipulated loan and one dry creek bed at a time began to collapse. Not with the dramatic violence of an explosion, but with the quiet, methodical precision of an audit, which was Lily thought exactly the kind of justice that an accountant would deliver. News travels fast in a town of 2,000 people. By the following morning, every person in Elk Ridge knew what had happened at Briggs Ranch, and the story they were telling was not the one Nolan Pratt had spent months constructing. It was not about a scandalous woman living in sin with two brothers. It was about a young woman who had uncovered a decade of corruption and stood on a porch in a snowstorm with a gun she had never fired and told a bully to get off her land. Dolores Pruitt, in a feat of narrative agility that would have been impressive if it were not so transparently self-serving, repositioned herself as someone who had always had concerns about the Pratt family and was glad that justice had been served. June Harper, who had no patience for revisionism, told Dolores to her face that she was full of it, but accepted the shift in public opinion as a net positive and moved on. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way that landscapes are quiet after a storm. Damaged but clearing. Altered but enduring. The bruises faded. Colton's arm healed, leaving a scar that ran parallel to the one on his eyebrow, another mark from another battle surrounding. Beckett's shoulder took longer, requiring physical therapy that he complained about with theatrical suffering that made Lily and Colton exchange looks of affectionate exasperation. Lily moved into the ranch house. Not dramatically, not as a grand romantic gesture, but gradually, practically one box of books and one bag of clothes at a time. Until one morning she realized that her cabin had become a place she visited and the ranch had become the place she lived. The place she belonged. She quit her job at the assessor's office. Not because of the reprimand, which had been quietly retracted after the Pratt arrests, but because the ranch needed her more. The financial systems she had built during her investigation became the foundation for a real business operation. She organized the books, projected cash flows, identified revenue opportunities that Colton and Beckett had never had the bandwidth or the expertise to pursue. The glamping operation was her idea. The upper ridge where Maggie Briggs used to ride on Sunday mornings had the kind of views that people in cities paid significant money to experience. Lily designed the business plan, secured the permits, and oversaw the construction of 3 canvas platform tents that offered the mountain experience without the discomfort. Beckett ran the horseback expeditions that brought guests to the site. Colton maintained the infrastructure with his usual silent competence. By the following summer, the glamping operation had a 4.8 rating on travel review sites and a wait list that extended into October. The organic produce was Colton's domain expanded under Lily's financial guidance from a personal garden into a commercial operation that supplied 3 restaurants in Bozeman. The website Lily built attracted visitors from across the country, people drawn by the photographs of mountain ridges and wild horses and a ranch that looked like something from a century that valued land and labor and the simple dignity of work done well. The 3 of them fit together the way the ranch fit into its valley naturally, as if the landscape had been shaped over millennia specifically to hold this configuration of buildings and fences and lives. Mornings with Colton on the porch, coffee and silence, and the mountains turning pink with dawn. Afternoons with Beckett in the paddock or on the trails, laughter and motion, and the particular joy of watching someone you love do the thing they were born to do on. Evenings together in the kitchen that smelled like wood smoke and garlic and whatever improbable combination of spices Beckett had decided to experiment with that night. They learned each other's rhythms. Colton woke first, checked the perimeter, made coffee. Beckett woke second, made breakfast with more enthusiasm than skill. Lily woke last, stumbling into the kitchen with her hair in cowl on and her eyes half closed, reaching for the coffee mug that Colton had already filled and placed at her spot at the table. They learned each other's wounds. Colton's nightmares came less frequently, but did not disappear. Some nights Lily woke to find his side of the bed empty and would go to the porch and sit beside him in the cold until his breathing slowed and his hands stopped shaking. She never told him to come back inside. She just sat. And eventually he would reach for her hand, and eventually they would go back to bed together, and eventually he slept. Beckett's wound was different. His was the fear of abandonment planted by the girlfriend who had asked him to choose between her and his brother. He covered it with humor the way some people cover wounds with bandages, and it worked well enough most of the time. But occasionally in moments of vulnerability, the fear surfaced. He would ask Lily if she was happy, if she was sure, if she did not sometimes wish for something simpler, something that did not require defending to everyone she met. And every time she gave him the same answer. I did not choose simple. I chose you, both of you, and I would choose you again tomorrow and the day after, and every day until there are no more days to choose. The community adjusted, not all at once, not without friction, but with the grudging practicality of people who live close to the land and understand that survival matters more than convention. The families who had been freed from Russell Pratt's financial grip became loyal allies. Tour guests who met all three of them at the ranch and saw the obvious, effortless affection between them went home and told friends that the Briggs family in Montana was the most genuinely happy household they had ever encountered. Some people never came around. There were still whispers, still sidelong looks, still the occasional pointed comment from a church pew or a grocery aisle. Lily learned to let these roll off her, not because they did not sting, but because the life she was living was so full and so real that the disapproval of strangers had become background noise rather than a crisis. Pastor Dale Whitfield invited Lily for coffee one afternoon, 6 months after the Pratt arrests. They sat in his office at the church, surrounded by bookshelves, in the particular quiet of a room where people came to confess things they could not say anywhere else. I am not going to pretend I understand your arrangement, the pastor said, with the careful honesty of a man who had spent 40 years navigating the distance between doctrine and compassion. It does not fit neatly into any category I was trained to address. I know, Lily said, but I have watched you. I have watched those boys, and what I see is not sin. What I see is three people who take care of each other with a kindness and a commitment that many married couples in my congregation would benefit from studying. He paused, adjusted his glasses. There is a verse, 1 John chapter 4. Everyone who loves has been born of God and knows God. He looked at her. I am not endorsing anything, but I am not condemning it either. Love is complicated. I have been a pastor long enough to know that God works in arrangements I did not expect. It was not a blessing, but it was an open door. And in a community where the pastor's opinion carried the weight of weather patterns and harvest predictions, it mattered. The call from Vera Mercer came in spring, 8 months since the last conversation, the one that had ended with sobbing and disconnection, in a silence so complete it felt like a death. Lillian. Hi, Mom. A long pause. The sound of breathing and the very particular quality of quiet that exists when someone is choosing words with the care of a surgeon, choosing incisions. I would like to visit, if that is acceptable to you. It is more than acceptable, Mom. It is welcome. Vera did not come during a normal week. She came for the Harvest Festival. It was Lily's idea. The annual Elk Ridge Harvest Festival, organized by Dolores Pruitt's committee, had declined to invite Briggs Ranch to participate as a family unit. The rules said couples. The committee said they were sorry, but tradition was tradition. Colton had wanted to ignore it. Beckett had wanted to storm the committee meeting. Lily had smiled in a way that both brothers had learned to recognize as the expression that preceded her most devastating strategic maneuvers. We will have our own, she said, here, at the ranch, open to everyone. They built it from nothing. Colton constructed a barbecue pit from Riverstone that could have fed an army. Beckett organized horseback rides for children, leading a parade of small humans on gentle mares around the paddock while making sound effects that had the kids screaming with laughter. Lily handled logistics, food coordination, and the strategic deployment of June Harper as head of hospitality, a role June performed with the aggressive friendliness of a woman who had strong opinions about coffee and was not afraid to share them. The worry was that nobody would come, that the invitation would be met with the polite silence of a community that had learned to tolerate the Briggs arrangement, but was not ready to celebrate it. June arrived first. She brought pastries and a hand-painted banner that read, Briggs Ranch Harvest Festival, in letters that were crooked and colorful and perfect. Then the Caldwell family from the next valley, then the Ransoms, then the Petersons, whose ranch Russell Pratt had nearly stolen 3 years ago and who had not forgotten who saved them. One by one and then in clusters, the trucks came up the drive, and by early afternoon the ranch yard was full of people, more people than the official town festival attracted all of them, eating Colton's barbecue and riding Beckett's horses and telling Lily that the potato salad was the best they had ever tasted. Sheriff Tom Hadley came in civilian clothes, ate 3 plates of food, and told Colton that the state investigation into Pratt Holdings was proceeding and that Russell Pratt's legal team had filed an appeal that was expected to fail. Pastor Dale Whitfield came. He did not make a speech. He did not offer a prayer. He simply showed up, ate a plate of food, complimented Beckett's horse handling, and stayed for 2 hours. In Elk Ridge, where the pastor's presence was a barometer of moral weather, his attendants said everything that needed saying. And then at 3 in the afternoon, a car pulled up the drive that Lily did not recognize. A sedan rode worn from a long journey with Colorado plates and a thin layer of highway dust on the windshield. Vera Mercer stepped out. She looked older than Lily remembered, thinner. The 8 months of silence had cost her too visibly in the new lines around her eyes, in the gray that had advanced through her hair, in the way she held herself slightly hunched as if she was bracing for impact. She stood by her car and looked at the ranch, at the people, at the mountains rising behind everything vast and indifferent and permanent, at her daughter who was standing by the barbecue pit in jeans and a flannel shirt with her hair pulled back and her face flushed from the heat and the work and the particular glow that belongs to people who are living exactly the life they chose. Colton saw the car first. He touched Lily's arm once lightly and nodded toward the drive. Then he stepped back, and Beckett stepped back with him, and they gave Lily the space to cross the yard alone. Mother and daughter stood 3 feet apart and looked at each other through the gulf of everything that had been said and everything that had not. "You came," Lily said. "I brought potatoes," Vera said. "Tell me where the kitchen is." It was not an apology. It was not an acceptance. It was a casserole dish held in both hands like an offering, and it was the only bridge Vera Mercer knew how to build. But it was a bridge, and Lily took it. In the kitchen, away from the noise and the crowd, Vera set down the dish and gripped the edge of the counter and said without looking at her daughter, "I do not understand this. I have prayed about it for 8 months, and I still do not understand it." "I know, Mom. But I watched a video that June posted online from the ranch. You and those 2 men cooking dinner. You were laughing. And I realized that I have not heard you laugh like that since you were a little girl, since before your father left." Vera's hands were white on the counter edge. Her chin trembled. "I do not understand it," she repeated. "But you are happy. A mother can see that. Even a mother who has made as many mistakes as I have." Lily took her mother's hands, held them the way Colton held hers on the porch in the dark with patience and firmness, and the quiet message that she was not letting go. "You did not make mistakes, Mom. You were scared, and you taught me to be scared too. But I am not scared anymore, and that is because of them." Vera stayed for the rest of the festival. She did not speak much. She watched. She saw Colton put a jacket around Lily's shoulders when the wind picked up the gesture so automatic it was clearly unconscious. She saw Beckett make Lily laugh so hard she choked on her cider, and saw the way he patted her back with a tenderness that contradicted his clownish exterior. She saw her daughter move between these 2 men with an ease and a confidence that Vera had never seen in her before, as if Lily had finally found the rhythm of a song she had been hearing her whole life, but had never been allowed to dance to. At the end of the evening, Vera shook both brothers' hands. She did not hug them. She was not there yet. But the handshake was firm, and she looked them both in the eye, and she said, "Take care of my daughter." And Colton said, "Yes, ma'am." And Beckett said, "Every day." And Vera nodded once and walked to her car and drove away. Lily cried after she left. Not the tears of grief or fear that had become so familiar over the past year, but the tears of something being repaired. Slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. The ceremony happened on a Saturday in October, 1 year after a broken-down car on County Road 12 had started everything. They held it on the ridge, Maggie Briggs's ridge, the place closest to God that did not need a church. They did not call it a wedding. The law did not have a word for what they were, and they had stopped caring about the law's vocabulary. They called it a commitment ceremony, and they wrote the invitations themselves, and they sent them to everyone who mattered and several people who had not mattered until the events of the past year had revealed their character. June Harper was the maid of honor. She wore a blue dress and cowboy boots and cried from the moment the ceremony began to the moment it ended and for approximately 30 minutes afterward. She had prepared a speech but abandoned it in favor of simply hugging all three of them repeatedly while saying, "I am so happy," through her tears. The guests gathered in a loose semicircle on the ridge, wrapped in jackets against the mountain air, the aspens behind them blazing gold and crimson in the autumn light. Below, the valley stretched in every direction, and the river caught the afternoon sun, and somewhere in the distance, a hawk circled on a thermal, riding the invisible currents that made flight possible. Colton went first. He stood in his dark suit with his scarred eyebrow and his calloused hands and his steady amber eyes, and he looked at Lillian. He spoke. "I am not good with words. You know that. Beckett got the words. I got the silence. But I need you to hear this. I spent 2 years in a place where the ground shook and the sky burned, and I learned that the only thing that keeps a person alive is having something to come home to. For a long time, I did not have that. I had the ranch, I had my brother, but I did not have the thing that makes a house a home. I did not have you." His voice was steady. His hands at his sides were still. "I promise to be the ground under your feet, solid, steady, always here. I am not going anywhere, not ever. And when the world shakes, I will be the thing that does not move." Beckett went next. He stood beside his brother, identical in almost every way except for the absence of the scar and the presence of a smile that was for once not performed but earned. "I had a whole speech prepared," he said. "It was eloquent. It was moving. It had a callback to the story about the Mustang that I told you on the porch the night I kissed you for the first time. But I am going to throw it out because there is only one thing that matters." He took Lily's hands. "You are the bravest person I have ever met. Not because you picked up a shotgun when Nolan Pratt came to our door. Not because you stood up in a coffee shop and told this town the truth. Because you chose us. Because you chose a life that nobody understands and nobody approved of. And you chose it anyway because it was yours. And you taught me that love is not about finding someone who fits into your life. It is about building a life that fits around the people you cannot live without." He paused, swallowed. "I promise to make you laugh every single day, even on the bad days, especially on the bad days. I promise to be the wind at your back and the voice that reminds you how extraordinary you are when you forget. I promise to love you loudly and shamelessly and without apology for the rest of my life." Then Lily spoke. She stood between them, small and fierce and luminous, in a dress the color of champagne with the mountains behind her and the valley below, and the faces of everyone she loved arranged in a circle around her. "I came to Elk Ridge running away from a life someone else designed for me. I was 24 years old and I had never been kissed, and I had never made a single important decision that was truly mine. I was scared of everything. Scared of men, scared of desire, scared of my own heart." Her voice broke. She let it. She did not try to control it or smooth it over or pretend she was stronger than she was. Because strength, she had learned, was not the absence of breaking. It was the willingness to break in front of the people you trusted to hold you together. "I found this place, this mountain, this ranch, these two impossible, stubborn, beautiful men who looked at me and saw someone worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around." She looked at Colton, then at Beckett, then at the sky above them all. "I promise to never run again. I promise to be brave, not because I am not afraid, but because you taught me that being afraid and showing up anyway is the only courage that counts. I promise to love you both, not divided, not halved, not completely. Each of you, all of you, for every day I am given." They exchanged rings. 3 simple silver bands, each engraved on the inside with the GPS coordinates of the ridge where they stood. The same ridge where Maggie Briggs had talked to God every Sunday morning. The same ridge where Lily had sat alone in her car and decided to stop running. Colton slid the ring onto Lily's finger with hands that did not shake. She slid one ring onto Colton's hand and one onto Beckett's. And when she looked up, both brothers were looking at her with expressions so identical and so full of love that her heart physically ached with the weight of holding it all. June made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a cheer. Pastor Whitfield, standing at the edge of the gathering, bowed his head briefly, and Vera Mercer, sitting in the front row in a chair that Beckett had carried up the mountain for her that morning, pressed a handkerchief to her eyes and did not look away. That evening, after the guests had gone and the valley had settled into the blue hush of mountain twilight, the three of them sat on the porch. Their porch. The position was familiar by now, as natural as breathing. Colton on the left, Beckett on the right, Lily in the middle. Coffee for Colton, cider for Beckett, tea for Lily because she had discovered that pregnancy made coffee taste like motor oil, and she had not yet told them about that because she was waiting for the right moment. But that is a story for another time. "What are you thinking about?" Colton asked. The question he asked every evening, the ritual that had become the punctuation mark at the end of each day. Lily looked at the mountains silver in the moonlight, ancient, impermanent, and holding the valley the way the men on either side of her held her life, with strength, with patience, with the quiet promise that they would still be here tomorrow. "I am thinking that your mother was right," she said. "This is the closest place to God that does not need a church." Beckett laughed softly, leaning his shoulder against hers. "Mom would have loved you." "Mom would have loved you," Colton corrected. His voice was low and certain, the voice of a man who stated facts rather than opinions. "The way we do." Lily smiled, reached for Colton's hand on her left, felt Beckett's arm come around her shoulders on her right. The girl who had been too afraid to live was now the woman at the center of a life so full and so brave and so entirely her own that the memory of that scared girl felt like a character in someone else's story. In the morning, there would be chores and coffee and the small negotiations of three people sharing a life. There would be horses to feed and books to balance, and Beckett's catastrophic attempts at baking that somehow always resulted in the smoke alarm going off, and Colton silently opening every window in the house. There would be challenges. Colton's nightmares would still come, and Beckett's fears would still surface, and the world outside the ranch would still fail to understand. But there would also be this, the porch, the mountains, the certainty, the three of them together choosing each other. Every morning, every evening, every day. And in the mailbox at the end of the drive, mixed in with feed catalogs and utility bills, there was a letter that had arrived that afternoon. White envelope, neat handwriting, return address from a law firm in Helena. Inside, a single page informing the Briggs family that Russell Pratt's attorneys had filed an appeal of his conviction and that the case would be reviewed in the new year. Lily had seen it first, had read it at the kitchen table with the afternoon light falling across the page, and had felt the old fear rise in her chest like water finding its level. The Pratts were not done. The fight was not over. She had folded the letter, placed it in the desk drawer, and decided to tell Colton and Beckett tomorrow. Tonight was for the ceremony. Tonight was for rings and vows and the sound of the creek running past the northwest fence, the water that she had fought to restore, flowing over stones that had been dry for too long. Tomorrow they would read the letter together. Tomorrow Colton would go quiet and strategic. Tomorrow Beckett would go loud and angry. And tomorrow Lily would sit between them at the kitchen table and pull out her laptop and open a new spreadsheet and begin building the case that would end the Pratt family's grip on this valley once and for all. Because that was who she was now. Not the scared girl from Denver. Not the virgin bride who ran from a life she did not choose. She was Lily Mercer, Briggs' partner and co-owner of Briggs Ranch. Loved by two men who did everything together, including loving her. And she had learned on a mountain ridge in Montana that the bravest thing a person can do is not pick up a gun or face down a bully or stand in a coffee shop and tell a town the truth. The bravest thing is choosing to stay, choosing to build, choosing to love without permission and without apology and without the guarantee that the world will understand. And that is the lesson worth carrying with you. Whether you are 24 or 64, whether you live on a mountain or in a city or in a small apartment where the walls feel too close and the future feels too narrow. Sometimes the most courageous act is the simplest one. Saying, I choose this person, I choose this life, not because it is safe, but because it is mine. And if this story meant something to you tonight, do me a favor, hit that like button. It takes a second and it means more than you know. Share it with someone who needs to hear that it is not too late to choose differently. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, and leave me a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me what time it is where you are. I read every single one, because one honest choice turned a frightened girl into a woman who stood on a mountain and promised forever to two men who taught her what it means to be brave. and it is never too late to choose a better way forward.